Hey Internet, this is Tom from Jumpman Gaming, and in this video we're going to cover circular movement. Specifically, you can use this to create trap objects that will circle around a point, or to create pendulums that will swing back and forth. So as you can see here, I have a project already started, with some rooms, some objects, and some sprites already created. We're going to start with our circle room. Our first goal is to have this circle object move in a circular motion around a center point. I've placed this green square here for reference. This square actually does nothing. So to get started, we're going to open up our circle object. And we're actually going to start with the step event. You may be used to other tutorials starting with the create event. I've decided that not only am I going to show you how to do this, but I'd like to show you my process. So let's start by adding a code block. If we break this problem down into its most simple form, what we are trying to do is change the X and Y position of our circle object so that it rotates around a point. So this is actually the last step in the entire process, is setting our circle object's new X and Y. So in order to determine our new X and Y coordinates, we need three things. We need to know what the center of our circular motion is going to be. We need to know the distance we want to be from that center, and we need to know the angle that we're going to be in our circle. The center has both an X and Y coordinate. GameMaker has a really great built-in function that helps us calculate where we need to be in the circle based on the distance and the angle that we give it. So what we do is we take our center X and our center Y, and we add the following functions. These functions take the following arguments, which are the other two things we need as part of the circle. The first is distance, and the other is our angle. So at this point, we have the calculations we need, but none of these variables have values. Let's start with determining where the center of our circle is going to be. So there's many ways to set this. I personally like to set things based on where I've put the object in the room. So in this case, we've already set our circle object in a position that is directly to the right of our center. The reason we do this is because a circle has 360 degrees, and in GameMaker, the start of that circle is to the right of the center, meaning the 0 position. 90 degrees is directly up, 180 degrees is directly left, 270 degrees is directly down, and then 360 degrees is equal to 0 degrees. So to determine our center X, all we need to know is where our object started in the room, our starting X position, and then we subtract the distance we want to be from the center. As far as our center Y, it is equal to our starting Y position. You'll notice that we've now used distance from center twice. We could very easily make the distance from center variable a local variable similar to center X and center Y and give it a value. However, this does not allow us to change the distance dynamically for each object in the room, so we're going to be setting this in the create event, along with our starting X and starting Y position. So the only remaining thing we need to set right now is our angle. So the first thing we need to do here is grab our current angle. GameMaker has a function for this as well. The point direction function takes two XY coordinates, draws a line between them, and then calculates the angle between those lines. It's important that center X and center Y be given first so that the calculation of the angle of the line matches how we're calculating our position in the circle, meaning from 0, meaning from the right. From here, all we need to do is add in how fast we want to be moving around the circle and the direction that we want to move around the circle. So let's clean this up and move to our create event. In the create event, all we need to do is set all those remaining variables that don't have values, which is the speed we're moving around the circle, the direction we're moving around the circle, the distance from the center of our circle, and then our starting X and Y position. For our speed, we could just set it as a random number, but instead, let's try to think of a real-world concept we can apply to this. Let's try to make it so that it takes exactly 3 seconds for our object to make a full circular rotation. To do this, we start with the full distance that we need to travel, 360 degrees. We divide that by the number of seconds we want it to take to move around the circle. Since GameMaker works in steps instead of seconds, we're going to take that number of seconds and multiply it by our room speed. For our direction variable, we just need this to be set to 1 or -1. This is a good opportunity to talk about commenting. Whenever possible, I like to comment things that help me remember what I was doing. To comment something like this doesn't add anything to my situation. If I go back and look at this code, reading rotational direction would already tell me this information. So instead, let's type something useful. So if I decide to step away from this code and come back to it, I'll know that -1 means we're moving in a clockwise direction. For the same thing, we can add to our rotational speed that this is actually in degrees. So we know that this is the number of degrees we're moving every step. For our distance from center variable, this would be based on the level you create, where the position in the room and whatnot. So for this particular variable, we are just going to pick a random value. The starting X and starting Y variables are simply equal to the X and Y values of where the object is when it was created. Great, so let's run it and see how we did. As you can see, our circle object is moving around a center point in a circular motion. Now, the reason we set our distance in our create event is so that we can use one object and dynamically change it in our room. So if we decide we want multiple instances of this object, all we need to do is change the create event of each instance in the room, which runs after the create event for the object. And now we have an object that can be used dynamically throughout a level. Okay, so what if we didn't want our object to move around in a circle? What if we wanted it to move back and forth like a pendulum? We're going to start by duplicating our circle object. I've already created a sprite for our pendulum, and we're going to start by placing this object in our other room. First of all, if we do nothing else, it works just like the circle. While the new sprite works perfectly fine as is, what you may want to do is have the angle of the image change as it moves around the circle. For that, we just go into the step event, and after we've calculated our angle, we simply set our image angle equal to our new angle. Since I drew the sprite in a way that makes it correctly orientated when it's at the 0-degree position, simply setting the image angle to the current angle that it's at makes it display correctly. If you've drawn something that is correctly orientated horizontally, I recommend rotating the sprite, or if you prefer not to do that, you can always add or subtract 90 degrees to the image angle depending on how you've drawn your sprite. This is still not what we want though, we want a pendulum. So if we open back up the step event, we just need to make a few changes. The first thing I want to note is that this code for setting our new X and Y position doesn't need to change. What we actually want to do is limit our angle. A lot of things in GameMaker can be solved by approaching a particular target, but as you move around a circle, it can be difficult to navigate changing between 0 and 360 degrees. So instead, we're just going to create a new variable, and it's going to be the total distance that we've traveled. So what we actually do here is we add our rotation speed to the distance that we're traveling instead this time. We're going to limit it so that the distance traveled variable can only be a value between 0 and 180. This means that our object will only be able to travel halfway around the circle before it has to stop. So here, since we're already adding the speed to the distance that we've traveled, we replace our speed variable with our distance traveled variable. Since our distance traveled variable will constantly grow, we no longer want to calculate our current angle based on where our current position is. Instead, we want it to be our starting angle. The way we do this is we change out our X and Y coordinate for our starting X and Y coordinate. The last thing we have to do is just add our distance traveled variable to the create event. Let's run our game and see what we have. So now our object stops after it's moved 180 degrees. But that's not exactly what we were going for. That is certainly an effect you would see in a video game, but we're going for a pendulum that will swing back and forth. The way we get this effect is by checking for when our distance traveled has been 180 degrees, and then changing some of our variables. First of all, we set our distance back to 0. Then we want to change the direction we're rotating in, and then we want to change our starting X position, which is going to be the position our object is in once it has reached 180 degrees. This will cause one slight problem. When we go to calculate our center X, we'll be then subtracting our distance from the new X, thus constantly moving left and left and left. So instead, what we want to do is add the distance from the center based on our direction. If we close this out and run it, the one last thing I want to show you is what if you didn't want to have an object the player could jump over? What if you wanted to have a solid object rotate from its center? For this, I first have to show you the other pendulum I've created, the way you can obtain the effect we are about to do to make sure that the Y origin on your sprite is set to its center, and the X origin on your sprite is set all the way to the right. We're then going to duplicate our pendulum object, set the new sprite, and with the second pendulum object, we want the center of our rotation to be the most left point. The change we need to make for this object is actually in the way that we calculate our distance from the center of the object. Instead of picking a distance, like we would for the other objects that have space, we want there to be 0 space that the player can jump through. Since our center is actually the left side of the object, what we want to do is set the distance from the center equal to the width of our sprite. And as you can see, our object rotates from its left point of the sprite. The right side of the sprite, where its X origin is, rotates down, and now there's no place for the player to jump through. Thank you for watching. If you'd like to support this channel and Jumpman Gaming in general, we do have a game currently available in super early access. The name of the game is called Sentinel Zero. It's available on itch.io right now, and I've put it on sale for $2 for anybody that would like to access it. The game is very early on in development. There's only one level to play. The point of purchasing would be to support Jumpman Gaming and get an 80% discount on the final price of the game when it officially releases. Any support is appreciated. Thank you again for watching. Let me know in the comments if you have any suggestions for future tutorials.